Ever wondered who Goliath really was? That giant who defied history and faith? Picture facing a threat so massive it feels unbeatable, a force so overwhelming it leaves you frozen with fear. You might feel like the soldiers of Israel, standing before a giant that seems invincible. Sometimes life throws obstacles our way that seem so huge, we feel small and powerless. Fear and doubt can paralyze us, leaving us hopeless. But the story of how Goliath fell offers a powerful solution. When we uncover who Goliath really was, we see that even in the face of the most terrifying challenges, faith and courage can turn the impossible into possible. Get ready to discover how the story of a simple young man taking on a giant can light the way for you to conquer your own battles. Goliath, a name that echoes through the ages as the very symbol of might and power, was a Philistine warrior from the city of Gath. Imagine living in a time and place where a man nearly 10 feet tall was a reality. Goliath stood around 9 feet 6 inches tall, according to some biblical records, meaning he was taller than most doors and ceilings of the houses back then. Let's put that into perspective. Think of the tallest basketball player you've ever seen on TV. Now, add a few more inches. Goliath was huge. His height wasn't just a fun fact, it was a real intimidating threat to anyone who faced him. He was like a human tower, with broad shoulders and muscles that looked like mountains. But where did Goliath come from? He wasn't just any man, not even among the Philistines. Gath, his hometown, was known as a stronghold of the most feared warriors. The Philistines were a warrior people, constantly clashing with the Israelites. And Goliath, with his monumental stature, was the champion of Gath, the man who led their armies with a presence that could shake even the bravest hearts. Goliath's stature wasn't just physical, it symbolized the power and terror of the Philistines over their enemies. He was the giant who dared anyone to face him, relying not only on his strength but on the reputation that preceded him. He wore a bronze armor that gleamed in the sun, carried a spear that looked more like a tree, and had a shield so large it needed a bearer just to carry it. Goliath didn't need words to command respect, his presence did that for him. On the battlefield, his gigantic shadow was the first thing his opponents saw, and that sight alone was often enough to plant fear and doubt in their hearts. He was, in every sense, a true giant, both in size and in threat. Goliath wasn't just a giant in size, but also in arrogance and intimidation. Every day, he stood before the army of Israel, a towering colossus that seemed unbeatable. His booming voice echoed through the valley, every word dripping with disdain and challenge. He insulted the people of God in a way that made the blood of any Israelite boil, yet at the same time, it froze them with fear. "You're just servants of Saul." Goliath would roar, his voice like thunder shaking the mountains. "Pick a man to come fight me. If he wins, we'll be your servants. But if I win, you'll be ours." This challenge, repeated day after day, echoed like a sentence of humiliation and despair. None of Israel's warriors dared step forward. Fear paralyzed their hearts and minds. Goliath's insults weren't just words, they were direct attacks on the faith and dignity of the Israelites. He mocked their God, calling them cowards for not having the guts to face a single man. "Where's your God now? Can't he save you?" Every word was a fresh wound, an affront that cut deep into the pride and honor of the Israelites. Goliath didn't just insult the warriors, he demoralized the entire nation of Israel. Saul's men, used to fighting brave battles, now felt helpless in front of this giant. Each passing day saw their confidence and morale dwindle. Goliath's challenge became an unbearable weight on the shoulders of every soldier. The scene was dramatic. On one side, the imposing Philistine giant, sure of his invincibility. On the other, the Israeli warriors, heads bowed and hearts trembling. Goliath was convinced no one could beat him, and his certainty seemed confirmed by the silence and inaction of Israel's army. As Goliath continued to hurl his challenges and insults, the Israelites watched their pride and courage tested daily. They wondered when, or if, a hero would rise to face the giant. Goliath, with his arrogance and scorn, was determined to prove that no one could defeat him and that the Philistines were, in fact, superior. With each new day, Goliath's challenge echoed louder, and doubt grew in the hearts of the Israelites. But amid all that fear and despair, the story was about to take an unexpected and dramatic turn, one that would forever change the course of events and become one of the most inspiring and well-known stories of the Bible. Goliath wasn't just an isolated giant. He was part of an ancient and mysterious legacy of giants known as the Rephaim. The Rephaim were a legendary people, known for their enormous stature and incredible strength. In the Bible, they are mentioned as a race of giants who inhabited the land long before the Israelites arrived. These giants were feared and respected, and their story intertwines with the legends and myths of the region. Goliath, being a descendant of the Rephaim, carried the weight and reputation of his people. The Rephaim were seen as almost supernatural beings, whose abilities and sheer size defied human understanding. Imagine living in a time where stories of giants were told around campfires, and every encounter with a Rephaim was a mix of fear and fascination. Besides the Rephaim, there was another group of giants mentioned in the Bible, the Anakim. These giants were also known for their immense stature and warrior skills. Some scholars suggest that Goliath could have been a descendant of the Anakim, who were equally feared by all around them. The Anakim, like the Rephaim, were a constant reminder of the power and grandeur that inhabited the land before the Israelites arrived. Goliath's connection to these giant peoples made him more than just a regular soldier. He was an heir to a lineage of mighty warriors, each one a giant in their own right. This added an extra layer of intimidation to his already terrifying physical presence. When the Israelites saw Goliath, they didn't just see a man. They saw the embodiment of an ancient and fearsome history, a living reminder of the legends of giants that once ruled the lands. The Rephaim and the Anakim were remembered not only for their strength but also for their combat skills. They were described as unbeatable warriors, capable of feats that defied logic and physics. Goliath, with his massive spear that looked more like a tree, his bronze armor gleaming in the sun, and his shining helmet, was the perfect embodiment of this legacy of strength and fearlessness. Understanding this part of Goliath's story helps us see why he was so feared and respected. He wasn't just a giant by chance. He was part of a tradition of giants, whose presence and power were known to all. This knowledge made the terror he inspired in the hearts of the Israelites even greater, and made the challenge of facing him even more daunting. With every insult Goliath hurled, every challenge he made, he did so with the confidence of someone who knew where he came from, and what his bloodline represented. He was a Rephaim, perhaps an Anakim, but above all, he was Goliath, the giant of Gath, heir to a history of power and fear that few would dare to challenge. Goliath, the Philistine champion, wasn't just a man of colossal size. He was also equipped with armor and weapons that seemed straight out of an epic tale. Every piece of his gear was designed to intimidate and protect, making him a walking fortress on the battlefield. First, his armor. Goliath wore a coat of bronze scales that gleamed in the sunlight, reflecting light like a series of metallic mirrors. This armor covered his massive body, shielding him from enemy attacks and giving him an even more fearsome appearance. The scales overlapped like those of a fish, allowing him mobility and flexibility while providing almost impenetrable defense. The armor alone weighed about 125 pounds, a weight that only someone with Goliath's immense strength could carry and still fight with agility. On his head, Goliath wore a bronze helmet, a symbol of his status and power. The helmet covered his forehead and extended down to his neck, protecting his head from the deadliest blows. It was adorned with details that reflected his heritage and his rank as the greatest warrior of the Philistines. Underneath the helmet, Goliath's eyes shone with unshakable confidence, his expression a mix of scorn and challenge. In his hands, Goliath wielded a spear that looked more like a tree. The shaft of the spear was as thick as a weaver's beam, and its iron tip weighed about 15 pounds. This spear wasn't just a weapon, but a symbol of his power and reach on the battlefield. Anyone who saw it knew that a strike from it could pierce even the toughest armor. Besides the spear, Goliath carried a sword, an instrument of destruction that he wielded with lethal skill. The blade of the sword was long and sharp, capable of cutting through anything in its path. The sword hung at his side, ready to be drawn at any moment, a constant reminder of his prowess in close combat. To complete his arsenal, Goliath was accompanied by a shield-bearer. This shield-bearer wasn't just a simple shield carrier, he was essential to Goliath's strategy. The shield he carried was enormous, covering much of Goliath's body and protecting him from long-range attacks. The shield-bearer stood in front of the giant, a first line of defense that made Goliath even harder to hit. Every piece of Goliath's gear was meticulously designed to maximize his effectiveness on the battlefield. His armor and weapons not only enhanced his already immense physical presence, but also represented an almost insurmountable challenge for any warrior who dared to face him. Imagine the scene: Goliath, clad in his gleaming bronze, spear in hand, sword at his side, and a giant shield protecting his body. He advanced onto the battlefield like an impending storm of destruction. Every step made the ground tremble, and every movement of his weapons made the air whistle. He was, in every sense, the embodiment of fear and invincibility. When Goliath stood before the armies of Israel, he wasn't just a man ready for battle. He was a force of nature, a colossus armed to the teeth, a sight that froze the hearts of the Israelite warriors with terror. The fight between David and Goliath wasn't just a physical confrontation. It was a battle with a strong religious undertone, a duel between faith in God and reliance on brute strength. This clash went beyond the battlefield and became a confrontation of deep beliefs and convictions. David, a young shepherd from Bethlehem, had come to the battlefield not as a soldier but as a messenger, bringing food to his brothers who were in Israel's army. When he heard Goliath's taunts and saw the paralyzing fear that gripped the Israelite warriors, something within him stirred. To David, Goliath's words were more than just a challenge to the men of Israel. They were a direct affront to the God of Israel, the Lord of hosts. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? David asked, his voice filled with indignation and zeal. While the soldiers around him trembled with fear, David felt a flame of courage and faith ignite in his heart. He knew that, though Goliath was massive and terrifying, he didn't have God's favor. David, on the other hand, had complete trust in the Lord, knowing that God had already delivered him from dangers before, like a lion and a bear while protecting his sheep. David decided to face Goliath, but not with a sword or a spear. Instead, he chose 5 smooth stones from a stream, grabbed his sling, and walked toward the giant. Saul, the king of Israel, tried to equip him with his own armor, but David refused. He knew his strength didn't lie in weapons or armor, but in his faith in God. Goliath looked at David and laughed. How could a young man, without armor and armed with just a sling, dare to face him? Am I a dog, that you come at me with sticks? Goliath mocked, dismissing David as if he were nothing. But David replied with firmness and conviction, "You come against me with sword, spear, and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." The difference between the two was clear. Goliath relied on his physical strength, his weapons, and his experience as a warrior. David, on the other hand, trusted in something much greater. He trusted in God. To him, this fight was an opportunity to show everyone, Israelites and Philistines alike, that God is powerful and that he fights for his people. As the two faced off on the battlefield, all eyes were on them. David ran toward Goliath, picked a stone from his pouch, and placed it in his sling. With a quick and precise motion, he launched the stone, which struck Goliath in the forehead. The giant fell with a crash, his massive body sprawling on the ground. What seemed impossible had happened. David, the young shepherd, had defeated Goliath, the giant warrior, not by the strength of weapons, but by faith in God. This confrontation wasn't just a military victory, it was a powerful demonstration of what faith can achieve. David's courage and trust in the Lord of hosts changed the course of the battle and left an everlasting legacy that with God on our side, no force or giant is unbeatable. Goliath's defeat by David wasn't just a personal victory for the young shepherd, nor was it simply a military win for the Israelites. It was a grand demonstration of the power of the God of Israel, and its impact resonated deeply among the Philistines and beyond. When Goliath hit the ground, the news spread like wildfire through the Philistine armies. The giant, who everyone believed to be invincible, had been taken down by a young man with no armor, no sword, just a sling and a stone. This sight shook the confidence of the Philistines. They weren't just losing a warrior, they were losing the symbol of their invincibility, their greatest weapon of intimidation. For the Philistines, Goliath's fall was a defeat that went beyond the battlefield. They worshipped multiple gods and believed these gods granted them strength and victory. Goliath was seen as a champion not only of the Philistines but of their gods. His defeat meant that the God of Israel, the Lord of hosts, was superior to any deity the Philistines worshipped. This event shook their faith and cast a shadow of doubt on the power of their own gods. The Israelites, on the other hand, saw David's victory as concrete proof that God was with them. This triumph couldn't be attributed to human strength or military skill, but to divine intervention. David became an instant hero, but he always emphasized that the victory belonged to God. He had told Goliath, "I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." And now, everyone could see the result of that unshakable faith. Euphoria swept through the Israelite army. Inspired by David's courage and God's evident intervention, they charged against the Philistines with renewed ferocity. The fear that once paralyzed them was replaced by a burning confidence. The Philistines, already demoralized by the loss of their champion, began to retreat. Goliath's defeat turned into a desperate rout, with the Israelites pursuing and defeating their enemies in a series of subsequent battles. But the impact of Goliath's defeat went beyond the immediate. Throughout the region, other nations heard of the young shepherd who, with the help of his God, defeated the giant. This story spread quickly, increasing the respect and fear for the God of Israel. The event reinforced the idea that Israel wasn't just an ordinary nation, but a people chosen and protected by a powerful and living God. For the Israelites, this victory was a constant reminder of the importance of faith and trust in God. David, who would later become Israel's greatest king, remained an example of faith-driven leadership. He always reminded the people that his strength came from God and that true victory was achieved through trust in the Lord. This battle became a legend, a story passed down from generation to generation, not just as a lesson in courage and faith but as a demonstration of divine power. David's defeat of Goliath stands as an eternal testament that with God on our side, no giant is too big, no challenge too impossible to overcome. It's a story that continues to inspire and strengthen people's faith to this day. After David's monumental victory over Goliath, the story of the giant's sword took on a special meaning and became part of David's heroic legacy. Goliath's sword, a colossal weapon that represented the fear and terror he inspired, wasn't simply discarded after the battle. Instead, it found new purpose and symbolism in the history of Israel. After defeating Goliath, David took the giant's sword and used it to decapitate his fallen enemy. This act not only confirmed David's victory, but was a visual declaration that Goliath's power had been broken. The sword, with its immense and heavy blade, was a testament to David's courage and the divine intervention that had guided the stone from his sling to the giant's forehead. The sword of Goliath was taken and stored in the sanctuary at Nob, a sacred place for the people of Israel. In the sanctuary, the sword wasn't just a war trophy, it was a tangible symbol of God's victory over Israel's enemies. It stood there, silent and imposing, reminding everyone who saw it of the battle where the young shepherd from Bethlehem, with God's help, had defeated the Philistine giant. Years later, Goliath's sword would once again play a crucial role in David's life. In a moment of great need, while fleeing from King Saul, David sought refuge at the sanctuary in Nob. Saul, consumed by jealousy and fear of losing his throne, saw David as a threat and was determined to capture him. Desperate and unarmed, David sought help from the priest Ahimelech. Ahimelech, seeing David in such need, asked what he required. David responded that he was on an urgent mission for the king and needed food and a weapon. The priest, aware of David's true situation, offered him the only weapon available in the sanctuary, the sword of Goliath. The sword of Goliath the Philistine, whom you killed in the Valley of Elah, is here, it is wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If you want it, take it, for there is no other sword here, said Ahimelech. For David, receiving Goliath's sword at that moment was a reminder of God's faithfulness and power. The weapon that once symbolized fear and oppression was now in his hands, a sign that God continued to guide and protect him even in the darkest times. The sword wasn't just a tool of battle, it was a symbol of hope and divine victory. David accepted the sword with gratitude, fully aware of the profound meaning it carried. Armed with the weapon of the giant he had defeated, David continued his journey, escaping Saul's grasp and eventually rising to the throne of Israel. Goliath's sword remained a symbol of his trust in God and the belief that, with divine help, he could overcome any obstacle. The story of Goliath's sword is more than just a war narrative. It's a powerful metaphor for faith, courage, and perseverance. The weapon that once sowed terror among the Israelites became a testament to God's power and David's ability to trust in that power in times of adversity. It's an eternal reminder that no matter how great the challenges we face, with faith and courage, we can overcome even the most fearsome giants. If you enjoyed this video, I invite you to click on the card on your screen right now and learn more about the story of King David. See you in the next video.